Shopify's checkout used to be a black box. Merchants could change colors and logos, and that was about it. Checkout extensibility changed that, and checkout UI extensions are the part of it that renders actual buyer-facing interface, banners, custom fields, upsells, thank you page content. Today we're grounding all of it in real Source 2 public example repos in Shopify's own current developer documentation to see exactly how targets, target APIs, and web components fit together. Welcome back to Shopify Development Deep Dive. This episode is an overview, not a single build. Shopify's own docs describe checkout UI extensions as three interconnected parts, and understanding those three parts is what makes every specific extension you'll ever write make sense. We'll ground each part in a real file, two genuine public example repos, plus the code samples straight from Shopify's current checkout UI extensions reference. Here's what today covers. The three-part Shopify's own docs say every checkout UI extension is built from targets, target APIs, and web components. The real, meaningful difference between static targets, block targets, and runnable targets, because that distinction decides what a merchant can and can't move. How the Shopify global object hands your code cart totals, buyer identity, and cost data at runtime. How methods like apply attribute change and apply metafield change actually write changes back to the cart, and why they're rate limited. And finally, what two real, public Shopify example extensions, a custom banner and a custom footer, look like in their entirety. 5 stages, every time. First, scaffolding. The Shopify CLI generates a starter extension and a templated checkout file. Second, picking a target. The TOML file's targeting array says exactly where in checkout your code renders. Third, reading data. The Shopify global object is how your code sees cart contents, cost totals, and buyer identity. Fourth, rendering. Shopify's own web components, built on remote DOM, are what actually draws banners, buttons, and layout. And fifth, applying changes. Specific methods write state back to the cart, each one rate limited so no single extension can hammer a buyer's session. A short list before we dig in. You'll need a Shopify app scaffold with Shopify CLI and installed on a development store, same baseline as every extension in this series. Familiarity with Preact helps, since at Shopify/UI extensions/Preact is the render entry point Shopify's own current examples use throughout. You'll want the checkout and accounts editor open at some point, since that's where merchants actually place block targets and configure extension settings. And critically, anything beyond a plain read-only UI, querying the storefront API, making network calls, blocking a buyer's progress, has to be declared explicitly as a capability in the TOML file, or it simply won't work. The real scaffold command, straight from Shopify's current Getting Started section. Shopify app, generate extension, template set to checkout_UI. That creates a file framework, a TOML configuration file, and a templated checkout JSX file where your extension's actual code goes. Every real extension we look at for the rest of this episode is a variation on exactly this starting point. This is the real TOML from Shopify's public custom banner example, trimmed to fit but unedited in substance. 1 target, purchase.checkout.block.render. A block target, meaning merchants reposition it themselves using the checkout editor rather than it being pinned to a fixed spot. And a real settings field, banner status, restricted by a real choices validation to exactly 4 values: info, success, warning, critical, so the banner's own component can style itself off a merchant chosen setting instead of hard-coded logic. This is the real custom footer example, and it's the one repo this episode found wiring 2 separate targets into a single extension. Purchase.checkout.footer.render after is a static target fixed at the bottom of the checkout footer, not something a merchant can drag elsewhere. Purchase.thankyou.footer.render after is the same idea on the order confirmation page. 2 different module files, 2 different pages, 1 extension. And that commented out API_access line is the real, exact syntax for requesting storefront API access, sitting right there disabled by default. This is the real cost API example from Shopify's current overview page. Every extension gets a Shopify global object at runtime, no import needed for it specifically in Shopify.cost.subtotal.amount.value is a live, reactive read of the checkout subtotal. It's rendered here with 2 real web components, stack for layout and stext for the actual string, and that same global object pattern is how your code reads buyer identity, delivery groups, or applied discounts anywhere in checkout. This is the real web components example, unedited. Stack, image, heading, text, Button. These are native elements built on Remote DOM, Shopify's own cross-platform UI library, and they automatically match Shopify's Polaris design language rather than needing custom CSS. Nesting an inline stack inside a vertical one is the real, idiomatic way to lay out an image next to a text block next to an action, and it's the same handful of primitives behind almost every checkout extension you've ever seen. This is the real apply changes example. Apply attribute change is a target API method that writes a cart attribute here, whether a buyer opted into a complimentary gift, and it returns a promise that only resolves once Shopify has actually applied the change and the corresponding read API reflects the new state. Shopify's own docs are explicit that these calls are rate limited. Extensions that write too many changes during one checkout session can get cut off from making further ones, which is exactly why the next real example batches instead. This is the real, current TOML schema straight from Shopify's overview page, on API version 2026-07. API_access allows storefront API queries from inside the extension. Network_access allows external network calls, the same capability the custom footer example left commented out. And block_progress is the one that lets an extension actually stop a buyer from continuing checkout, which real validation style extensions rely on. None of these three are on by default. Everyone is an explicit opt-in a reviewer can see at a glance. Two last real pieces. These add event listener calls are Shopify's own recommended error handling pattern, and they matter because a checkout UI extension runs inside a web worker, not a normal browser page. There's no window object, so third-party tools like Sentry need those same self.add event listener hooks wired in by hand. And Shopify app deploy is the real command that ships your extensions bundle to Shopify with one hard constraint: the docs state plainly, a compiled bundle can't exceed 64 kilobytes, enforced at deploy time, no exceptions. A few real limits worth remembering before you build one of these yourself. Extensions run sandboxed in a web worker. There's no window, no DOM, and no access to the checkout page's own HTML or other extensions code, by design. Checkout UI extensions for the information, shipping, and payment steps are a Shopify Plus feature. Specifically block and thank you page targets are not. Batch your apply attribute change and apply metafield change calls with promise.all wherever you can, because Shopify's rate limiting is real, and once an extension's hit it, it can't make further changes for the rest of that checkout session. And that 64 kilobyte bundle cap gets enforced at deploy time, full stop. There's no override. Pulling it together. Every checkout UI extension, no matter how simple or elaborate, is the same three things: a target, target APIs, and web components. Static targets are fixed in place, block targets are merchantry positionable through the checkout editor, and runnable targets return data with no rendered UI at all. The Shopify global object is the one consistent way your code reads cart, cost, and buyer data, wherever it's running. Writing changes back goes through methods like apply attribute change and apply metafield change, both rate limited, both worth batching. And the two real, public extensions we opened up today, a merchant configurable banner and a 2-target footer, are exactly this shape, nothing hidden underneath. That's how checkout UI extensions actually fit together: targets, target APIs, and web components, grounded today in Shopify's own current documentation in two real public example repos. Part 13 takes this further and builds a complete custom checkout UI extension from scratch. If you want the rest of this series as it publishes, subscribe now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 13.